Hey guys, I'm Kate King. I'm a licensed therapist and the host of this channel and of the Healers Interview series. Thanks for joining me today. We're going to talk about the mother wound, which is code for issues with your mother. So many of us may have relationships that involve manipulation or difficult boundaries, difficult relationship dynamics with our mothers. And this is something that can be passed down through generations in sort of an ancestral trauma lineage, from grandmother to mother to daughter to granddaughter and beyond. So today we've got Nina Danhorn, who's a licensed therapist, and she's going to talk to us today about her specialization with helping people work through and identify their mother wound issues. She has a ton of great information and she's really knowledgeable on the topic. So whether you've labeled your mother a narcissist or having a personality disorder or being an addict or whatever feels difficult in your relationship with your mother, I think you're going to find some really valuable information here. So get ready to learn and have your mind blown by the incredible information that Nina Danhorn will share with us today. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you can get access to the other interviews and some of the other amazing resources I have on here for you to be the most awake, alive, and engaged in your life. So here's Nina Danhorn, and I hope you enjoy. Nina Danhorn, I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you for being with me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure. I've loved your series. I've loved every interview you've done, and I think you're doing such amazing work in the world.
Thank you. I appreciate that so much. So, I'm really excited for this topic of the mother wound today. I think it's something that many people experience, but don't always have the words or the resources to be able to express or really work through. So, I can't wait to dig into it. But before we dive in, do you want to just give us a brief little introduction about how you got to where you are right now in your work?
So I have about 12 years of experience being a therapist, and originally I'm actually from Russia. So that's, I guess, the roots of this work is that where it all began. So I've been doing this work for a while prior to being a therapist. I got my first master's there in education and psychology. And that's when I was introduced to fairy tale therapy, which is a little bit different. It doesn't really exist here, though. There's a lot of work related to it and a lot of publishings related to it, but it's not considered a separate therapy like art therapy or play therapy would be considered here. And so that just kind of got me interested in the depth approach and looking at the roots of things. And as I was doing my work, a lot of the surface stuff was not enough. And although I really wasn't aware of my own mother wounding, it opened the door to exploring further. And so after moving here in 1999, I worked as a teacher because part of my education was in education and teaching and training. I was a training and HR manager and then a teacher. And then I went back and got my second master's degree in counseling development here in the States. And I've been a counselor since then. So um, that's where I got started in the work. And then progressively in my own work with my own stuff and just with my clients, I started noticing different patterns for people. And mother one came to be. It's a newer term, but I guess we've been doing this work for many years, probably century, in just different ways, right? Like not necessarily with coaching or psychology, but on our own.
As you were doing the fairy tale and the therapy based on stories, was there some kind of interest in the mother and daughter, grandmother relationships that came like through the stories that led you more toward here?
Yeah, so it was very interesting because I noticed in a lot of stories, mother dies. And then there's always the evil stepmother that comes in. So I always just questioned why that was. Why would we choose to tell stories like this? Wouldn't you want the mother to be nurturing, caring? But fairy tales are there to teach us stuff, right? So it's the good mother that dies. And so in a way, it's preparing us for the mother's inability to care for us, right? And so mother wound is really the pain that results from needs being unmet due to mother not being able to be available in some way, right? So it was, to me, it was the metaphor for that. The mother is not available to care for the child. Now the child has to do their own work, or the daughter has to do her own work and go on a quest.
Right. So it's like the fairy tale shows this highlighted version of like some dimension of like the evil or wicked or bad mother. And then with the death of the good mother, kind of you don't have a choice. You have this version of bad in some way in your life. And you, as the heroine of the story, have to kind of forge forward and figure it out, protect yourself from that.
hmm And it makes me think of like mothering functions in general, right? So the first function is, of course, nurturing, right? We know that, nurturing the baby, and then protecting, right? And so that's where it comes in, where the evil stepmother is not able to provide any of that, right? She's not then able to empower and initiate a woman into womanhood, right? And so the quest really lies around those meeting those needs on your own.
Right. Can you speak just a little bit to the polarity of like good, bad, light, and shadow, specifically to how that works within this mother archetype?
Yeah, I ask my clients to reflect on whether something is balanced, not necessarily good or bad, but balanced, right? So we a lot of times in our society think of things either good or bad and that polarity. But I think fairy tales and the quest, the heroine's journey, really teaches us to look at things as whole, right? That there's a shadow and the light, and there's a purpose to both of those. And without the suffering, there wouldn't be transformation and development and progress and growth. So there's a need for it in our lives. However, I do hate the statement of everything happens for a reason. It's just the ones that just kind of irks me. But and I know a lot of people get triggered by that, because I think there needs to be the validation of that experience. And I think in any quest, it's very important to have somebody rooting for you. I think you can go so far if somebody's on your side and supporting you and believing in you. And if your mother is not able to provide that for you since birth, then you're in trouble, right? Because then you feel like nobody believes in you. And I think that brings us to this conversation about why are we talking about mother one, right? Why are we not talking about father one? Is because we developed, within our mother's bodies, right? We have that connection. So if that connection is missing in some way, then we don't have that attachment to a primary caregiver. And so it's a very, very difficult path. And we really struggled with resiliency.
Absolutely. And I think that there's a lot of pressure on mothers too. I know this as a mother myself, that like you really don't want to mess your kids up. And you know that
Right.
it's so easy to develop these mother wounds because no mother is perfect. We're all going to have our elements of failure, large or small. And so I think there's this pressure of like, how can anyone ever be, as Carl Rogers said, a good enough mother,
Mhm.
to not create these like really deep and like painful wounds within our children. Or how can we face and repair them as they come up and be sort of the healthiest mothers possible, knowing that there's no such thing as an all good mother. Like we've all got our shadow.
Right. Yeah. Again, it brings us back to this good or bad, right? And perfect, striving for perfection. The expectations are so high on mothers, especially nowadays. If you think in the olden days, they used to take a village to raise a child, and it still does take a village to raise a child. However, we're so disconnected now. There's not a lot of support. This is not to knock those mothers, right, that are not doing their best, but this is for us to start healing from the patterns that have been passed on for generations, right? Of it's kind of like that Cartman's triangle, right? Like if I'm not capable of doing something, then I fall into these different behaviors that kind of just don't work within the relationship, right? Like you get defensive and manipulative sometimes, or whatever it may be, and that connection is lost. So I think ultimately this work is around reestablishing that connection to self and reestablishing it with your mother, the inner mother that you have inside of you, which is not always perfect. However, that I think you hit it on the head with the repair. That repair piece is so important. And so, as mothers ourselves, during those hard days when we don't want to mess up our child, right? But we know we're not doing our best, maybe the most important thing I think is repair, is providing that repair and taking responsibility and showing our kids that we really do care and providing them with that positive, unconditional positive regard.
Right. And I think that some of the motherhood wounding that can happen is when a mom maybe does her best, maybe doesn't do her best, but regardless, a rupture was made,
Mhm.
but mom won't apologize. Or mom is projecting blame onto the child, or mom is suddenly absent and child feels isolated, and then the repair doesn't happen. So repeated experiences like that over time create a core belief system that my first relationship in the world with my mother has constantly shown me people aren't there, I'm not worthy, love isn't real, all these stories that we learn from this really dominant and primary relationship, and they get sort of self reinforced over time because they keep happening without our effort toward sort of investigating what our part is in the healing. And I think that's an important piece of the mother wound is it's less about the mom and it's more about us and how we show up in that healing process.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to remember that there's a lot of shame that keeps us captive in all of this, right? There's a reason for why those people don't apologize, right? Like why we wouldn't want to apologize, because taking responsibility for a mess up, especially a big one, is really hard.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's a lot easier to try to avoid it in any kind of way, right? Like that's where we talk, oh, this is so manipulative, but it is trying to keep yourself safe, right? It's also protective. So a mother is also trying to protect herself. And sometimes mothers think that they're protecting their child um, with these unhealthy patterns, right? Of ways that they have learned of coping that they have learned maybe from their parents or from their mother. This work is really about looking at your own responses and stopping for a second and shifting, right, into healing versus just repeating those patterns over and over again, and then teaching your children to not take responsibility, right?
Mhm.
Not addressing their pain, not addressing their feelings, hide, 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 and that doesn't work.
Right. And there's this huge body of science that's growing now around intergenerational trauma
Mhm.
and lineage patterns. Currently, I'm rereading the book It Didn't Start With You. And it's all about just how we pass things down through our family systems. Um, just like we pass down our genes, we tend to pass down behaviors. So there might be a story in a family where, mothers don't apologize to their children when they mess up, or when there's a mistake, mothers go missing and the child feels abandoned, and not only is this happening now, but your mother's doing this to you because her mother did this to her.
Yeah.
So the intergenerational trauma piece is really interesting.
I actually, a long time ago, I did this activity with my therapist where she asked me to imagine something I wanted to pass on to the women in my generation. And I got very defensive about that. And I was not able to do that in the first try. But then I had to really sit with that and imagine the lineage of women in my family, right? And to learn more about them, where they came from. And I think, like, to sidestep this, I think it's important to recognize that we do our best with what we have. That's truly my belief. And so if we look back a century ago, right, that mother did the best that she could. And the hope is that the mother that came after her, her daughter, who became a mother, did better than her, right? Because she learned from that experience. And was she able to do that healing? Was she able to see, be introspective and really see what, some of the patterns and that we're maybe able to see now. So I think when we think of our generational lines, right, and how things have happened, I think it's important to put your hand on the heart, right, and give them grace and understanding that they probably did the best that they could in the time and the situation that they were in. I think ultimately, as mothers, we all carry the protective gene, right? That mother would do anything for her child. Some don't. Some, have had a lot of hurt and a lot of trauma and not able to connect with that. But I think in general, mothers want to do what's best for their children. So sometimes it may look like giving up your child, right? So we can't knock them for it again, right? Like this is again not to criticize mothers, right? And to be angry with them and blame them for everything. I think this work is so much about healing that generational line through recognition and through the gifts that you can give them, right? If you think about gifting something to your mother and gifting something to your grandmother, what would it be, right? And if you had a chance to speak with them, what would you say? Probably you wouldn't be angry. Maybe you would be. I don't know. But, it depends on your personal situation. However, when we speak to people, we see them as human beings who are trying to do their best. It's a little bit easier to see the pattern, the overarching pattern. It's like almost sometimes I say it's like a possession, right? Like a person is possessed because of the hurt or, that is guiding their decision. Hurt people, right? So if they got hurt and there's a lot of trauma in their past, then it explains their behaviors a lot of times.
Right. So digging really deep in your own personal work and trying to access compassion and empathy for the
Yeah.
mothers who came before, and really seeing that energetically, psychologically, and emotionally, this is sort of like an evolution, just like species evolve and they change and they become better and better through the generations. This is our responsibility as well in our human line and in the line from mother to daughter,
Mhm.
repeating.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I have a question for you I'm thinking that some of the people watching might be like, yeah, but my mother's been diagnosed with a mental illness, or yeah, but my mother has, raging addiction. What would you say to people who have a mother wound with a mother who is clearly unwell?
Right. So I think start with yourself. I always say that start with your wounding, start with healing your wounding and focus on that. I think it is absolutely okay to protect yourself if that relationship is painful. I've known many people who have taken a break from their relationship in order to heal. I think it is really always hard to respond to somebody else's wounding when they have wounded you, especially if it's your mother, because the wound is usually so deep and over time. That's when we talk about the attachment trauma, developmental trauma, right? Complex PTSD. So you can't respond in a healthy way most of the time within the relationship if you are not truly healed. So my advice would be to really look at your own stuff with it and sit with it and do your own healing. And then if you're ready, you can re-enter that relationship. And if you're not, you don't have to. We're led to believe that it's if somebody's your family, you have to be in a relationship with them, but that's not necessarily true. If the relationship is abusive and hurtful, then there's no need to stay in it or there's no need to put up with the abuse, right? So that's when we talk about boundaries versus defenses and doing that work
So,
of protecting yourself, your heart.
right. And it may not be leaving the relationship forever. It may be leaving the relationship to do your work and then come back to the relationship with healthier boundaries or in a way where you participate in a way that's healthier for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, can you tell us some of the ways that you do this mother wound work?
Yeah, so a lot of times when people come in, I tell them that, we're going to be healing some traumas. All of us have them. This is going to be um, a good thing for us to look at, right? All the roots or where everything comes from. So a lot of times I take somewhat of a developmental approach, but also I work with ego states. A lot of times when mother wounding happens, we create certain parts of self that are protective and certain parts of self that are more hurt parts, right? The wounded parts, the exiled parts that we sometimes like or don't like. And so I use the process of balancing those parts, meeting them, working with them, healing them, and developing a personal relationship with them in order to identify what type of part they are, what their role has been, right? To just thank them for the work that they have done to protect us. I mean, think of that, an abusive relationship, right? um, we have certain defenses for a reason. Those parts came in to protect us. And so they can stay within our world, but on different terms, right? So I really help people take control of their system and to get back or walk home back to their true authentic self. So a lot of times the work involves the shedding of the skin and becoming your true self. Not a very easy process, however, beautiful, absolutely beautiful. I also use EMDR as part of the trauma work, of course. I find that very, very valuable. Narrative therapy, soul collage, which is really close to my heart. That's a beautiful way to see your parts. And I have brought some of my cards to show you for the defenses, the parts of me that have protected me when I was little. But the main part of this work is putting the person in charge in their adult self versus being frozen in time when things were really rough, right? When they were in the fight or flight response, and coming out of that space and living at a higher level of life.
Mhm. It's beautiful. I love that. I would love to see some of the cards that you'd be willing to share. And just for the viewers to know, these are really intimate and it's a real gift that Nina is willing to show us some of her own artwork. So I just want to sort of publicly really honor that and thank you for your willingness to share something that's personal to your story.
Thank you. And one thing I did forget to say that a lot of my work with people is usually around providing that repair that they didn't receive from their mothers or other situations. So sometimes I think traumas can be very overt and obvious, right? But when we're working with such a complex developmental trauma, right? Attachment trauma, then there needs to be a different approach to that, right? And so you don't have to have a relationship with your mother or try to work through the stuff with your mother. You can provide yourself the repair, um, and mother yourself and reparent yourself. And that's part of the work.
A bit through the artwork too, right? And through the way that you do this parts work and the creative process of teaching your system that that energy can come not only from mother but from self.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so some of the cards that I do want to show are the protectors. And so here's the workaholic. So we do verbal processing, but sometimes with this, with collaging these different images, it's, all you have to do is just look at it, and a lot of us can relate because this work is pretty archetypal. So we share a lot of things. I mean, how many people do you know who slide into this when things get rough, right?
Right. And you're using pre-existing images from magazines, right?
Yes, yeah. It's usually several images that you would collage on this soul collage card. And you can find out more information on soulcollage.com on how to create cards. It's available to anyone, but I think it's such a beautiful process to really witness that in someone, to see their hurt parts and their protective parts.
Mhm.
The shopaholic. So this is just one image, right? So, but it, said it all.
Yeah.
The Sleeping Beauty, the runner, very similar to Sleeping Beauty, but in a different way, different energy. And the next one I was going to show is the inner critic. I
Mm.
think that's a very important one. And I think a lot of times people want to start here because it is such a strong internalized voice in us, that it is nice to establish a relationship with that voice because it comes up a lot for people. But the main archetypes I usually work with people in this work is inner child, the different aspects of inner child and the survival archetypes, and then inner mother and inner critic.
Mhm.
So those usually come up, but I wanted to show like just several of them so you kind of have an idea of what I'm talking about.
I love it. It's
Yeah.
beautiful. And it's amazing to see the way that you can take images that are everywhere and anywhere in magazines and kind of assemble them into ways that have such meaning for you.
Absolutely. It's wonderful to see that from the client.
Mhm.
When all they have to do is just hold up this card and they don't even need to say anything. And then we deepen into that work, but I find it very beautiful.
Yes, this is what I love so much about art therapy and the creative therapies is that there's this felt sense of the energy that the art can help us to see that we may not be able to see if we're just using language alone. And so
Yeah,
it's so beautiful.
I love it.
So, if somebody were interested in doing a bit of mother wound research, you have provided me with a lot of books and websites. And for the viewers, I'll have a slide at the end of this interview with all of those, and they're also listed below in the description. But, Nina, is there anything that people can do at home to just sort of deepen into this if they're not ready yet to go to a therapist or if they have limitations with their budget and maybe they can't go to therapy yet? How can people do this on their own?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the authors that I recommend to start working with is Bethany Webster, and this is her book, Discovering the Inner Mother. She does a lot of exclusive work with this, and she has a Facebook group where she posts quite a bit of information and she's very generous with worksheets. I think, she has like a free email workbook that you can get when you sign up to her newsletter. So I would start there and then look up Soul Collage on soulcollage.com. And you can start making cards. It seems like it would be so complicated to make this card, but it really isn't. It's a very simple process. Really, it's a very beautiful, intuitive process. So what you would do is just choose 10 images that speak to you for some reason, and then choose the images that are related, right? Like that for some reason have similar energy. Like the inner critic wouldn't have any, beautiful mothering or inner child on it, well, unless it's scolding the inner child, right? But just keeping it to the energy of the inner critic and create a card out of that and just kind of see what happens. If people don't want to use the actual soul collage cards, I've used paper plates. The inside of the paper plates, you can cut out a small circle and just use that. Or Amazon sells cards, I guess index cards. They're not as thick as soul collage cards, but they do have big ones like this. Because it is nice to have space to work on. They are small. So people are like, oh, well, this is different from the vision board. The vision board has so much space. It's really hard to shrink it down to a small card. But I think it's good to spend time to really choose your images that represent that energy best.
And it's important to have the cards all the same size.
Yes, I like that. I like to sometimes pull a card to ask it a question instead of, using like oracle cards or, talking to somebody. Sometimes that's not available to me, or consulting with your mother. Sometimes that's not available to you, but you can pull a card for your inner mother, right? The good mother, right? The one that is always there for you, the Mother Earth, or whatever it may be, and consult that. What would that? How would she respond to the question that you have? And then decide whether you want to take that advice or not,
Mm.
because you're in control of your system, right? Not that certain part.
Right. Reclaiming that power and taking ownership for your own feelings, and then resourcing for where you can help get your needs met in ways that are going to be healthy for you.
Yeah, yeah. Just consult yourself in a different way.
Mm.
This is just really the expression of what you already have, the wisdom that you already carry. I always say that a child comes into this world completely dependent, right? Not knowing anything about this external world. However, internally, they have everything they need. It's already there. All the wisdom is already there. And that's another question that I get asked a lot. Well, what if I'm not a mother? How do I know what a mother is? How do I know how to access that energy? And that's where soul collage, I feel like, comes in so handy, because you do have it already. Just look at those images and choose whatever fits the energy of that specific archetype or specific part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to just give a shout out to any of the men who might be watching this. And I wonder if you have any message for them about the male archetype and how to heal mother wound from a perspective of being the son.
Absolutely. That's also a question I get asked a lot. Can a man have a mother wound? And absolutely, they have a mother, right? They were born from a mother, so they can absolutely do this work and go deeper into that. And why would they want an inner mother? Well, and why would anybody want a good inner mother that can care for their needs and give them that unconditional positive regard, right? All of us deserve love.
Mhm.
All of us are born deserving love. And so this work is really bringing us back to that, to belonging to self, belonging to this world, belonging in general, right?
Right.
So men deserve to belong just as much as we do.
Yes.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter who you are, you deserve to belong and be loved.
So this is independent of any gender identification. This is a
Absolutely.
human need, a human experience.
Yes, absolutely. And
Okay.
it's beautiful, beautiful work. Coming home to yourself, it's to your authentic self, whatever that means to you. And that's where that shedding of skin, right? Like all of these ideas that we have picked up along the way from a mother, from our society, from our friends, right? And we've created for ourselves, shedding all of those defenses and rebuilding your system. It's beautiful work
It
to
is
really belong to yourself.
Yes, and the way that you talk about it is it's so gentle and loving while also having this kind of reinforcement of courage and strength. And so the way that you blend those, the softness and the strength together is, I think, really unique to your approach and your practice.
Yeah.
And I wonder too, I know that you often run groups and you have offerings for people from your work. Is there anything exciting going on in your work that you want to give a special shout out to before we end today?
Yes. So I do a once a month group that meets for 9 or 10 months usually. And it's very, very close to my heart. I'm very passionate about these. And I kind of birthed them the year prior. So they're always different. And I actually have two coming up in 2022, and they both start in January. And so one is it's called Into the House of the Riddle Mother, and it's about the dark side of the feminine and really balancing the dark with the light. I find it very interesting whenever I do a dark group. It comes out to actually be a very light group because we recover the light aspects of those archetypes. And when I do a very easy light group, it recovers the dark archetypes because a lot of our wounding comes up in that. So, and then there's another group that is geared towards breaking down those defenses and looking at them and respecting them and not throwing them away necessarily, right? But accessing those protectors and really working with them. And it's called Mirror Mirror.
I love that. So, can we find these on your website?
Yes, heartstringscounseling.com under groups.
Okay,
They're
great.
posted.
Well, this has been a really exciting conversation for me. I learned a lot just listening to you talk. And I can tell that there's just so much more depth into this topic. And we don't have time for it today. But if people feel like they want more, maybe we can have a follow up, or people can discover more of what they're looking for in the wealth of resources that you've provided.
Absolutely. And I think, it's important to do this work because it's all really about freedom and clarity. And it's nice to live your life from that place versus kind of just being lost in the woods, bring back the fairy tale aspect of it. And so if you can bring yourself, you can do this work on your own. I think it's nice to do it with a therapist because you can go deeper and faster with things, on the spiral of change of how we do our processing. But I think somebody can absolutely do this work on their own and do some major healing through this work.
It sounds wonderful. Well, thank you so much for the time today that you took for this interview and for everything that you shared. It's been really wonderful having you here with me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.